On Primetime Politics, pushing back on Ottawa's pollution cap.
Like, he has a deranged vendetta against Alberta. It's very obvious.
The Alberta Premier says the Trudeau government is overstepping, and she is promising to fight the environmental regulations in court. Coming up, we'll get reaction from the Environment Minister, who unveiled his government's draft regulation for oil and gas today. Also,
together, we will fight, and win.
Are we ready to win?
We'll check in on the U.S. presidential campaigns on the eve of the American election. And
Canada lost a giant.
Remembering Murray Sinclair, the man who chaired the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, dies at 73. This is Primetime Politics. Hello, everyone. I'm Michael Serapio. Ottawa released draft regulations today to cap greenhouse gas emissions from the production of oil and gas. Dubbed the Oil and Gas Pollution Cap, the federal government is aiming to limit the industry's GHG to 35% below 2019 levels, arguing regulations are needed as profits in the sector have soared in recent years, but the vast majority of those profits have been given to shareholders instead of investing in technology that would make oil and gas production cleaner.
Whether it's Pierre Poilievre, whether it's Daniel Smith, whether it's Scott Moe, pretending that climate change isn't happening in the face of mounting climate impacts and dramatic impacts on the lives of Canadians, but also cost to the Canadian economy. They will continue doing stupid things, and we will continue focusing on helping Canadians.
Now, reaction to the draft regulations was swift, with the Alberta Premier promising to fight the cap in court, saying effectively it would force a cut in production and hurt her province.
This is not responsible policy. This is a vendetta. Like, he has a deranged vendetta against Alberta. It's very obvious. We've been watching it for some time. He's trying to find a way to get around what the Constitution says. He even acknowledged that they are not permitted to do a production cap because it is natural resources fall under provincial jurisdiction. Somehow he thinks he's going to sneak one in and we won't notice and the rest of the country won't notice. Well, we've noticed, and we think the courts will notice. He cannot do this.
Well, to discuss the issue, we're now joined by Canada's Minister for the Environment, Steven Guilbeault. Minister, thank you for taking the time.
My pleasure, Michael.
Now, your government calls this a pollution cap, but Alberta says it will ultimately become a production cap because companies will choose to develop resources elsewhere once they meet your allowable emission ceilings. Does that worry you at all that this will have a negative impact on the Alberta economy?
No, it doesn't. And frankly, what the government of Alberta is saying is simply not true. As you know, per our Constitution, the use of natural resources is a provincial jurisdiction. So I as federal minister, can't do something that would impact that. And the projections in the documents that we've released today show that by 2030, production in the oil and gas sector will increase by 16%. And what we're really doing is going after the pollution. And we've done analysis over 2 years. We've talked with experts, with people from the industry and provinces, and our analysis showed that we can reduce the levels of pollution by 35% in the sector by 2030, while the production continues to increase. There's lots of technologies out there, and we're not talking about technologies that haven't been invented yet. Like, these are all off-the-shelf technologies that companies can implement right now to reduce pollution.
Except that when you listen to the Alberta Premier, because she had a news conference not long after your own, you know, she says technology has already led to a big decrease in the amount of carbon that's created by the oil and gas industry. So she is making the argument, lean in on this, because not only she, but for example, business groups will point to the fact that industry will move elsewhere, and they're very worried about the impact this will have on essentially oil and gas workers in the province.
Well, it is true that there's been a slight decrease in the emissions of the oil and gas sector, but nowhere near to the levels that are required and nowhere near to what we're seeing in other sectors. For example, if you look at the electricity sector, buildings, and many others. And really, Michael, it's about making sure that every sector does its fair share when it comes to fighting climate change, and also making sure that those companies that have made, like the profits of these companies have increased tenfold since the pandemic, going from about $6 billion to $60 billion. And what we're doing with this regulation is ensuring that they invest some of those profits into making sure that there is a future for workers in Alberta in the energy sector. Because as world energy and oil demand declines, those producers of oils that will still have a place in this low carbon future will be the one that can produce oil as low emitting as possible. And that's already what we're seeing. For example, Suncor has already invested in a very important carbon management project. Strathcona, which is another oil producer in Alberta, has invested $2 billion in another carbon management project to reduce their emissions. So companies, the smarter amongst the group, are already doing it, and we want to make sure with this regulation that the entire sector does its fair share, as other sectors are doing their share as well.
Mm-hmm. So again, Alberta's calling this a production cap. You don't think this will cap production in any way?
Listen, Michael, if I was, as federal environment minister, to put in place a cap on production, we would lose in courts. And this wouldn't help Canadians, this wouldn't help us fight climate change, this wouldn't help us advance reaching our goals in terms of cutting pollution. So what we're doing is going after pollution. And then the Supreme Court of Canada said clearly that the federal government has a role to play, and this is good news for Canadians, because this is good news for workers. It will mean billions of dollars invested in the energy sector to create good paying jobs for years and years to come.
Now, Premier Smith is promising to take your government to court over this because, again, even if you are targeting the emissions and the pollution here, they say the practical impact will be on production. Are you confident this will win in court?
Yes, we are, absolutely. As I told you earlier, we anticipate by 2030 that the production in the sector is going to increase by 16%. So I'm not sure I followed the Premier here saying that, you know, it's going to lead to production cut when we're actually showing that production will increase.
Mm-hmm. Now, in your news conference today, you said that Alberta does stupid things, and in response to that, we heard the Premier accuse you of having a, quote, deranged vendetta against Alberta. What do you say to that?
I said that conservative leaders in Canada are playing stupid games when it comes to climate change. They're pretending that climate change isn't happening. Just for this summer, Michael, $7 billion in climate damage, the worst year ever. And that's just 2 months of 2024, not the entire year. And Canadians are paying for that all across the country. Atmospheric rivers in British Columbia, forest fires in Jasper, Fiona on the East Coast, heat waves. Climate change is real. It's happening, and as a responsible government, we're putting in place a plan to ensure that we can fight climate change, that we can invest in the Canadian economy, and we can create good jobs. Conservatives, leaders like Pierre Poilievre and Premier Scott Moran, Premier Smith are pretending that climate change isn't even real, and that's why I say they're playing a very dangerous game with the livelihood of Canadian, with the future, not just the economic future, but what kind of planets will we leave to our kids and grandkids? We have a moral obligation to act, and unfortunately, they're failing on that obligation.
Mm-hmm. Do you think you did enough consultation with Premier Smith and Premier Moe before coming up with these draft regulations?
Well, I mean, we tried. Alberta refused to show up for most of the meetings, so we can't force people to participate in our consultations. But we've been working on this for 2 years, Michael. Like last year, roughly at this time, we produced a framing document which was based on months and months of consultations, like more than 100 meetings with industry, experts, provinces. We've continued the consultations since then in 2024, and these are draft regulations. We will continue conversations to finalize the regulations in 2025. But at the end of the day, if some provinces simply won't participate, it's not something we can control, but we're willing to work with everyone to make this the best possible regulations they can be.
Are you worried that Parliament may not last long enough to see these regulations see the light of day?
Well, my message to the Bloc Québécois and to the NDP who've called on us to move ahead with this regulation, putting a cap on the pollution of the oil and gas sector, is that if the Bloc Québécois decides they want to work with Pierre Poilievre and make the government fall, they will be responsible for preventing us from being able to put in place this important piece of regulation to make sure that Canada does its fair share, to make sure that the oil and gas sector does its fair share when it comes to fighting climate change.
Minister Steven Guilbeault, thank you so much for the time this evening.
Thank you, Michael.
Murray Sinclair is a man whose name will forever be remembered in Canadian history. A member of the Peguis First Nation, Sinclair was a tireless fighter for the rights of First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. And as chair of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, he challenged Canadians to confront the truth of residential schools, address the legacy of abuse that continues to be felt to this day, and to heal Canada's relationship with Indigenous peoples. Sadly, Murray Sinclair died today at a Winnipeg hospital. He was 73.
This is a moment for us to remember him, to recognize and celebrate him, but also take on all the work that he has left us as we continue to fight every day for a better country, for Indigenous peoples, and indeed for all Canadians.
Well, with more on Murray Sinclair and the legacy he leaves behind, we're now joined by Moran, these days with the University of Victoria, but he was also the founding director of the National Centre for Truth and Reconciliation. Rai, good to see you again despite circumstances. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Listen, first, my condolences, because you knew Murray Sinclair. You worked with him so closely. It had me wondering about how you're feeling today.
Yeah, it's one of those days, to tell you the honest truth, I think my feelings are growing throughout the day. I woke up, I saw the news immediately. Obviously, I was very sad. We kind of knew that this was coming. We didn't, of course, know when. But as the day has progressed, I've probably in some ways become progressively sadder in some ways, because I've been talking to a lot of friends, hearing from a lot of people across the country. I hear in them both their love, their deep admiration for the man that we're remembering today, but also the profound sense of loss that they're feeling, and really that the country as a whole is feeling.
Mm-hmm. Well, he was a tireless fighter in life, and his work with the TRC undoubtedly changed this country forever. But, you know, in chairing the commission, he had to listen to so many stories from survivors about the abuse they witnessed and suffered as children in residential schools. What did he say to you about the challenge of doing that work?
You know, this is something I've reflected on quite a bit, because I was with the commission as well. I mean, we traveled the country together. We had this kind of collective experience of, in a way, trauma, I think, that we all went through at the TRC. And in some ways, we talked a little bit about it. We knew that this was a dimension and a dynamic of the work. And in other ways, I think we all suffered in our own degree of silence as we went through the commission's work. And I think Murray, to a degree, suffered with his own silence. And I think this is something that's in his book as well, where he talks about, you know, not having cried because he was concerned that if he started crying, he just wouldn't stop. And I think that revelation, that the profound grief that we heard through the commission, the profound grief and sorrow that he heard about people like himself, like his family, like his loved ones, was something that he not only endured, but then with so much grace, with so much wisdom, and with so much fortitude, then took all of that and converted it and changed it into the most powerful message of hope, of determination, of aspiration to help this country be the country that it truly should be. And that's a country based on justice, fairness, respect for human rights. And in that, we have such a profound debt of gratitude to Murray for his gifts in that regard.
Mm-hmm. Still, though, I wonder what he would have thought of where we are today, because as you know, 94 calls to action in the TRC's final report, in the recommendations, very few have been fulfilled after these many years. I think the actual number is 11 have been fulfilled of the 94, 39 being worked on. Do you know if Murray Sinclair was happy with that, or was there a sense of disappointment?
I think when we go back in time and we look at Murray's very clear statements on priority calls to action coming out of the TRC, it is clear to state that we have not succeeded on a number of those priority calls to action. So one of which was the National Council on Reconciliation, but others were important as well. The new Royal Proclamation, the Covenant on Reconciliation, these were things that were intended to fundamentally reconfigure our commitment to one another as Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples in society. And those were huge priorities for the Commission at the time of the release of the reports and in the years to follow. We haven't seen a lot of movement on those. So I think, now at times like this, it really demands that we not let this amazing opportunity slip through our fingers. And this opportunity is one of listening to residential school survivors, of heeding their calls for action, heeding their calls for change in this country that were so beautifully articulated by the TRC and so eloquently expressed by Murray. And we can't let this opportunity pass. And I know that is absolutely what Murray would be thinking about right now. He would be telling us right now, okay, Moran, feel bad, but now get to work and keep going and do the work that we've asked you to do. And
that is to you and other leaders, but I wonder if you might distill that a bit more, because Canadians right now, they're reeling with this news. Unexpected for many. Many did not know that his health had deteriorated in these last few months. How do you think Canadians might remember and honor Murray Sinclair best?
I think one of the best ways to honor Murray Sinclair is to keep the relationship between perhaps the past, the present, and the future in mind. So for those that haven't had the opportunity to spend time listening to Murray Sinclair, please do so. Read his book, listen to his speeches, listen to the literally thousands of hours of content that's online. Spend some time getting to know this incredible Canadian leader, this incredible gift to this country that we've been so fortunate to have within our midst. Listen to the words that he shared, because I have full confidence that people will be profoundly moved and inspired by those words. Murray has been an exceptional leader. Now, and on the forward-looking side of things, well, then we are all responsible for the implementation of the TRC's calls to action, and we're all responsible for reconciliation. We're all responsible for the establishment and maintenance of mutually respectful relationships. And this is work that we've been called upon to do as individual Canadians, part of this grand family that makes up this country. So you may be a newcomer to this country, you may have been here for many generations, you may be Indigenous, you may be not Indigenous, but this work of truth-telling, understanding what the human rights record of this country is, and then making the change that's essential and necessary is the work that still lay ahead of us. And that's the work that we all need to be doing, and frankly, that we're all going to have to shoulder a little bit more, because we don't have Murray there to carry the immense load of this work that he has been shouldering on behalf of all of us for many, many years.
Do you think that will change your own life?
What I know for certainty is that my life has been profoundly changed for the better since I've come into contact with Murray Sinclair. And that's leaving my professional life and my job out of it. I've become a better human being, I hope, and I believe at least, or at least I have the aspiration of being the best human being that I possibly can be, thanks to so many of the teachings that I've received from Murray. It's that spending time with him and spending time listening to him has been a gift that I would wish on every single person in this country. And that's where I do really believe that the more time you spend listening to his very wise words will only serve individuals, serve this country to the positive.
Right, Moran, again, I'm so sorry for your loss, but really appreciate the time this evening.
Yeah, thanks very much. And my best, deepest condolences to the family and to everybody else who's hurting today.
Now, Murray Sinclair's family did issue a statement today, and it reads in part as follows. The impact of our dad's work reached far across the country and the world. From residential school survivors to law students to those who sat across from him in a courtroom, he was always known as an exceptional listener who treated everyone with dignity and respect. We know that stories of his kindness, generosity, and fairness will circulate for generations to come. A sacred fire has been lit in front of the Manitoba Legislature, where the public is invited to make an offering of tobacco and to pay their respects. To the U.S. now, where today was the last full day of campaigning in that country, as tomorrow is Election Day south of the border. And while the final results will probably not be known for days, it is widely believed that a handful of swing states will be the deciding factors. Among them, Pennsylvania, where both presidential candidates were seen today.
We here know it is time for a new generation of leadership in America. To offer that leadership as the next President of the United States of America.
With your vote tomorrow, we are going to fire Kamala and we are going to save America.
Well, with more on the U.S. campaign, we're now joined by Patrick Svitek, journalist with The Washington Post. Patrick, thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
So here we are on the eve of U.S. Election Day, and both candidates are spending a lot of time in Pennsylvania. Talk to us about what the latest polls are saying about the state and the strategy that you've been seeing with both Kamala Harris and Donald Trump as they try to shore up support.
Well, the polls in Pennsylvania are much like the polls everywhere else. They're showing an incredibly close race. We've seen some recent national polling that gives Kamala Harris a slight advantage. But as you kind of hinted at by bringing up Pennsylvania, this race is going to come down to the outcomes in 7 battleground states, and Pennsylvania is considered perhaps the most competitive out of those battleground states. It is one of 3 of those so-called blue wall states that Trump carried in his upset victory in 2016, but lost 4 years later to Joe Biden. And so now in these blue wall states, he's trying to reclaim them.
And we did see both of them campaign today in Pennsylvania. But talk to us about, as you say, it's the most competitive, arguably, but talk to us about the Electoral College votes, because for Kamala Harris, I'm wondering how important Pennsylvania is as she tries to secure 270 Electoral College votes. Can she win without Pennsylvania?
So Pennsylvania is part of what I think a lot of people consider her easiest path to victory, which is winning Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan. And then she'd have to pick up Nebraska's 2nd district, the single electoral college vote there. But that is considered her most straightforward path to victory here. And so that's why I think you're seeing her campaign so much in Pennsylvania. She is spending the entire day today in Pennsylvania. Donald Trump is also campaigning today in Pennsylvania, although he also is going to 2 other states. But it really has become the #1 focus of the campaigns for the reasons I just described.
Mm-hmm. So Donald Trump spending time other states today. Does that then mean that he sees another path to 270?
Sure, and I should note one of the states that he's been spending a good amount of time in over the past few days is North Carolina. He's had at least one event there today, Saturday, and Sunday, which I think has gotten a lot of people's attention because North Carolina is a state that he carried twice. It was a very narrow margin in 2020, but it's really a must-win state for him, and so it seems like in these final days, he's really playing defense there, and I think that's been one of the more surprising developments of the home stretch for his campaign.
Mm-hmm. Now, talk to us about the impact of what we saw at Madison Square Gardens, because that was meant to be Donald Trump's closing argument. Instead, very much overshadowed by the speakers that preceded him. One in particular, the comedian that made the anti-Puerto Rican joke. How is that playing out in these final days of the campaign?
Yeah, the Democrats are working really hard to harness the outrage from that insult, that comedian's insult of Puerto Rico, especially in a place like Pennsylvania. We were discussing just a little while ago. There is a significant, at least compared to other battleground states, there's a significant Puerto Rican population in Pennsylvania. And so what we've seen in recent days is Democrats and allied groups have really made an all-out targeted effort to make sure that Puerto Rican voters in Pennsylvania are aware of those comments, and not only aware of those comments, but aware of Donald Trump's failure to denounce or apologize for those comments. His campaign did put out a statement saying they don't reflect his views, but it was, far short of anything, expressing, I think, regret or contrition for what happened. And so Democrats are really trying to use that to their advantage in these final days, especially in Pennsylvania.
Mm-hmm. Now, tomorrow, of course, is a U.S. election day, but when will we actually know the winner? Because the last time around, it took a few days before Joe Biden was actually declared.
Given how close this race looks in the polls right now, I think few people are expecting that we'll have a clear outcome on election night, on Tuesday night. I think most people expect it could take until Wednesday or maybe even multiple days after election day for there to be a race call. And so, right now, at least the Democratic side of the race, people are really trying to manage expectations for how long this process could be and trying to guard against the length of that process leading to doubts about the integrity of that process. Of course, everyone is on edge after what happened after the 2020 election in the United States, where Donald Trump spread falsehoods about the election that ultimately culminated in the attack on the Capitol. So that really looms over this coming experience that we're about to have this week.
Mm-hmm. And finally, Patrick, I also wonder about security precautions, because I think I saw throughout D.C. Barriers being erected. What is happening right now in terms of security precautions? What does that say about what officials believe is the potential for violence?
Like I said, I think people are on edge everywhere, whether it's the barriers you talked about in D.C. I think in other cities, you've seen maybe more local security measures taking place. What we do know is what happened in 2020, as I just described. And we also can look at polling and see that voters are concerned about this. There was a poll today that found that 72% of likely voters across the United States are concerned about the potential for violence after this election. So it's something that I think is very much top of mind for voters. At least one of the things that they're thinking about heading into tomorrow. And one thing we have seen, I think that's a little different from 2020 with at least communications from election officials, is in some of these battleground states, election officials are trying really hard to be as transparent as possible, to be able to describe how their jobs work, how the process works, to be able to call out what they see as political misinformation out there ahead of time. So, again, I think that's just a part of the just greater heightened awareness that people have right now for trying to make sure there's more confidence in this election. Well, we are certainly watching from this side of the border. Patrick Svitek, thank you for this. Thank you for having me. And that is Primetime Politics for this Monday evening. I'm Michael Serapio. For everyone here at CPAC, thank you for watching. Join us tomorrow evening as we bring you special coverage of the U.S. vote. Until then, have a good night and take care.